Good afternoon. My name is Ronnie Green, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice Chancellor of the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I welcome you today on this December afternoon during finals week here on campus, and a very busy time as we're kind of in the stretch heading toward home at Christmas to this Heuermann lecture. Just a word about the Heuermann lectures. This is a new event that we began this fall. Our first lecture was in October with Professor Swaminathan from India, the first winner of the World Food Prize. And then our second lecture was in November with our own Steve Banziger from our Department of Agronomy and Horticulture on the day that he was awarded the presidential chair for the University of Nebraska. And today, of course, we're very delighted to have with us former Governor and former U.S. Senator Bob Kerrey. These lectures have been designed for us to have a forum within I&R and the greater campus community around the issues of food security, natural resources security, rural landscape security, and how those issues are shaping the way we think, what those challenges are that lie ahead of us. The lectures wouldn't have become possible without the generosity of Keith and Norma Heuermann, who have been longtime supporters of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, from Phillips, Nebraska, involved in the popcorn business, the seed corn business. Keith is with us here this afternoon. He's down here on the front row. Norma's ill today. I wish she could be with us, but please join me in thanking Keith and Norma for their generosity. The lecture this afternoon is being live streamed and web archived, so we do have folks joining us remotely for the lecture, and we welcome all of you in that forum as well. We also will be seen on Campus Cable Channel 4 and Lincoln Channel 21 to reach Lancaster County. All of the lectures are being archived at heuermannlectures.unl.edu for future reference. Today, we're particularly pleased to welcome, as I said, Bob Kerrey to our podium. He certainly is well known in the state of Nebraska and beyond, is a native Nebraskan, served as governor of the state of Nebraska from 1983 to 1987, and then as U.S. Senator from Nebraska from 1989 through 2001. Most recently, he served the majority of the decade of the past as the president of the New School in New York City. And more recently, he has joined M&F Worldwide Education Holding as the company chairman of that group, responsible for the company's education businesses, leads strategic initiatives and evaluation of future investments in the education sector. Since leaving the Senate now 10 years ago, he has continued his public service involvement, having served as a member of the 9/11 Commission that you will remember well, the National Resources Defense Council's Action Committee, and a variety of other forms of service. As former governor and U.S. Senator, he certainly knows the importance of water and other natural resources to the state of Nebraska, and particularly to its agricultural base. We are very much looking forward to Senator Kerrey's presentation this afternoon entitled Conflict and Resolution on the Missouri River. Please join me in welcoming Bob Kerrey.
Thanks, so I'm just talking to this. Well, first order of business, let me get that off the screen. There we go. Thank you very much, Ronnie. It is very nice to be here. See Martin Massengale again. Martin and I did a lot of good together, I think, and Irv Amtweit. I've benefited enormously from this university, and it was fun. I happen to be an unashamed advocate of Article 1 of the Constitution, which gives Congress the authority to spend money, and it was a pleasure to work with this university to help make the kinds of investments that a university such as Nebraska needs for basic, applied, and the education, research and the educational efforts of this university. Probably the most, not probably, the most important public institution in our entire state. Some disclosure here, whoops, Ronnie's speech is on top of mine. That's not good. He already gave his. I don't want to give it again. I've never given a lecture before. I've been lectured, but I've never given one. And there was a time, it seems like only yesterday, when I could write a speech and make the font large enough or I wouldn't need glasses, but those days are long behind me. So here's a quote from a book that I believe tells the story of the West and how we developed as well as any. It was written by James Michener back in the 60s, called Centennial. But it was still the river which determined what the surface of the land would be. And starting 8 million years ago, it once more began to tumble out of the mountains with greatly increased velocity, cutting and swirling and spreading far across the plains. It was engaged upon a gargantuan task to scour away every vestige of the enormous quantity of land that had been contributed by the new Rockies. In some places, it had to remove up to 1,000 feet of burden. From extensive areas, it had to cut away at least 300 feet. But the river succeeded. Again, it's very good to be here. I was born in this city. University of Nebraska is my alma mater. I was born here actually during the Second World War. My father was stationed out at the Army Air Base just west of town. He and my mom came back here after the war. They brought 3 boys and a girl. They had another son and 2 daughters. My mom ended up teaching here from 1968 to 1978 in the food and nutrition department. She was clearly the smartest in our family. She graduated #1 in her class at Iowa State. Never got a grade less than an A. Raised 7 kids, and when I was here at the university, I started in 1961 in pharmacy. My second year, I took organic chemistry. My mother decided to go back to college, get a master's degree, and she and I were in organic chemistry together. And it was only by the grace of God that I managed to get a grade higher than hers. So I got deep affection for this university and deep affection for this place of Lincoln. My father came back after the war. I came back after my war, injured, disillusioned. And I can never repay the people of this community for the kindness that they showed me and the help that they gave me to help me put my life back together. So I owe this place a lot more than I can ever repay. And Keith, it's obvious that you and Norma feel the same way. Your philanthropy, including the gift that funds this lecture series, is a part of a very large stream flow of generosity that makes America unique. It's among the short list of things that I learned while being president of the New School, and it often gets missed. I certainly missed it when I was in politics and business. The generosity of Americans is something that gives this country tremendous strength. Second place is way down the list in terms of individuals willing to make gifts to good causes like Keith and Norma have given to. So I very much appreciate it, and I join those who have thanked you before. I'm going to thank you for your generosity and the gift that you've made to the university and the good that you've done for our state. So here's the Missouri River Basin, and I was asked to come back and give a lecture on the politics of the Missouri. I spent a fair amount of time engaged in the politics about water. But in doing so, I want to call your attention to a problem. And I recognize that it's a problem that's not viewed as a problem by very many people, but that oftentimes happens to me anyway. That problem is that the residents of the basin have no public authority that's charged with the responsibility for resolving the constant conflicts that we humans have over the use of the river's water. We've delegated that authority to a number of federal agencies, including the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation. But what happens in the aftermath of that, as a consequence of not having a public authority, it almost guarantees that the politics of the river will be at best dysfunctional and at worst counterproductive. The historic floods of 2011 brought these politics into full view. It's worth noting that these floods managed to produce an unusual agreement between Republicans and Democrats in the Congress. 13 upstream and downstream senators have united in criticizing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And they sent a letter to the General Accounting Office, the administration, asking the GAO to examine specific actions leading up to the Missouri River floods including whether the Corps fully adhered to their master manual used to calculate the timing and size of water releases from their 6 Missouri River dams. They want to know if the releases contributed to the flood's impact more than the freakish set of weather conditions that combined to produce the largest amount of water entering the basin since 1898. First of all, to live on the high plains is to be given an opportunity to learn about the weather. We become skilled at watching the sky in order to detect a sign of an oncoming storm. We discuss and complain about the cold. We discuss and complain about the heat. We embrace the seasonal changes, sometimes even in the darkness of winter when we're dreaming about year-round sunshine. We take pride in telling our stories of survival. Remember the tornado of 1975, we ask. I was there. Were you? Remember the blizzard of '84. I almost didn't get back home when the road in front of me suddenly disappeared. Remember the terrible time back in the 30s when the Republican River flooded, or the 50s when the Big Blue rose violently from its banks, or the time in the 60s when ice jams on the Platte did so much damage. I've experienced all 3 of the major kinds of weather disasters of the high plains. But for me, floods are by far the worst. Water can be very scary. It does not compress. When moving, it is transformed from a love-inspiring source of life into a death-delivering, insatiable monster. Moving water will sweep you away without regret or remorse. It punishes those who forget that we cannot survive too long beneath its surface. Drowning seems a terrible way to die. I have dreams of floods, dreams of being cut off when the water crosses the road, dreams of climbing to higher ground at night with the sound of rushing water rising behind me. I have dreams of objects and people I know floating by and beyond my capacity to help. I have dreams where I reach out and I'm able to save others or myself. Of the 3 major weather disasters in our memories, floods, tornadoes, and blizzards, floods stand out in several important ways. First, they do much more damage. Second, engineers have never proposed innovative ways to eliminate tornadoes or blizzards as they've had with floods. And third, only with floods do our memories contain complaints about the government not doing enough to keep the damage to a minimum. That last difference is significant to me, and I believe the inevitable conflicts over water would be easier to resolve with changes in federal law that brought our elected officials more closely into the decision-making about the Missouri River's stream flow quality and the Missouri River's stream flow quantity. I believe we need more transparency in the decision-making process, but more on that later. But before describing what I would like to see us do in the future, a brief history of our land and our river is in order. It is a history that helps me understand why we humans need our water, why we fight over it, and how it has defined the place we have chosen to live. This place on the high plains was born in and created by violence, violent tectonic shifts, violent volcanic explosions, violent creeping glaciers of ice, violent storms, and violent floods. All have shaped this place that looks so flat and so peaceful to those whose only purpose is to drive through as quickly as possible. The age of this place is not comprehensible to me. If you stand at Monument Rock or Scottsbluff Monument, you can see in layers of rock 10 million years of history. But try to imagine 50 or 80 million years ago when the new Rocky Mountains rose from the depth of our earth, or 15 million years ago when the plains rose and drained the great inland sea. I find myself failing utterly. I can't even imagine a life a mere 20,000 years ago when the last of the great ice ages formed the boundaries of our Missouri River, which is North America's longest and most violent river, and my guess is you won't do much better. It's hard enough for me to get the story straight of the great European conflicts over the land that began before the 1804 Lewis and Clark expedition. It was motivated by Thomas Jefferson's desire to spread the empire of liberty as far west as possible. This adventure, as we sometimes prefer to forget, set up a fatal conflict between ourselves and the native culture that preceded us. Still, the likelihood that we will fail to comprehend fully the depth of time that it took to build this place doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand how this place became what it is. Its age just might inspire humility. The process of its creation just might remind us of how sometimes futile it is and sometimes dangerous it can be to try to alter that process because of the inconvenience it produces for modern life. When we European settlers came upon this river, our primary source of power at the time was provided by ourselves or by our domestic animals. So it's logical that when the work of travel and transport was necessary, rivers were a much easier, lower cost way to move. We were moving from east to west, and we offloaded our cargo on the western banks. We couldn't use the river much in the winter or during the spring floods. We generally moved when the river had enough water to float our boats, but not so much to swamp them. Accordingly, we built our warehouses and other structures as close as possible to the water. We did not have enough information to know about 50 or 100-year floods. We thought all rivers were basically alike. The Missouri, we reasoned, must be like the Mississippi. We must be able to navigate it the same way. If we could just clear the snags of cottonwoods, if we could just build and maintain a reliable channel. Later, when professional engineers arrived to give answers to the questions asked by settlers and pioneers full of the can-do spirit we admire so much, we began to plan and build dams to provide water for crops when the rains do not come, and to store the water when there's too much. The engineers told us how we could keep the river channels open and navigable. In spite of all this planning and all this building, we still fight over water. We cannot help ourselves. It's built into our natures. We'll cooperate as families. We'll cooperate as tribes and communities in order to gain strength in numbers. But still, we fight. We're willing to go as far as a chicken in providing an egg for breakfast, but we're not willing to go as far as the pig. In John Wesley Powell's 1879 report on the lands of the arid region of the United States, he observed that a north-south line approximately at the 100th meridian separated arid and non-arid lands. This line transects Nebraska from Ainsworth to Cozad to Arapahoe. To the east, the annual rainfall exceeds 20 inches a year. To the west, water shortages make farming a very risky business. This condition greatly affects the activities of human beings to the west and east of the 100th meridian. To the east, where too much water is the rule, our primary concerns are navigation and flood control. To the west, we want to store the water in order to irrigate our crops when the rains do not come. We want to divert water from places that have more than we think they need to our farms and to our cities. The development needs of the east led to the establishment of the Army Corps of Engineers. The development needs to the west led to the creation in 1902 of the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, which is located inside the Department of Interior. Strong leaders at both of these agencies oftentimes acted more out of desire to build than the need to balance the variety of interests on the water. They were particularly susceptible to the appeals of commercial interests and local boosters in the late 19th and early 20th century when navigation and construction radically altered the nature of the river. Further, both of these agencies had ambitions that at times challenged the basic idea of private property rights. Many questioned their authority to control so much of what went on in the basin. And perhaps the most important debate was whether the Commerce Clause of our Constitution gave them the power to determine what structures could and could not be built. This debate was settled on the 16th of December, 1940. On that date, the Supreme Court announced a ruling, United States v. Appalachian Electric. And in that decision, the Supreme Court of the United States gave Congress broad authority to develop the rivers for navigation, hydropower, irrigation, and recreation, as well as to restrict the rights of private owners and riverside land. On the 2nd of June, 1941, in Oklahoma versus Atkinson, they once again decided that a dam on the Red River was also constitutional under the Commerce Clause because of its aim of controlling floods and improving navigation. Using the authority granted them under these two decisions, Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 44, more commonly known as the Pick-Sloan Act. On December 22nd, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed it into law. And Section 9 of that act authorized the development of the Missouri River Basin. The story of this, That's a bad picture. There we go. The story of this law, I'm terrible at PowerPoints. They asked me last week if I wanted to have had anything to show, and I said no. And then over the weekend I accumulated some, so I may forget to turn it. If I do, it's fine to wave at me until I've got the wrong slide up. Anyway, the story of this law begins when Colonel Lewis Pick, who was the Missouri River Division engineer, was tasked with producing a survey to recommend what to build to prevent devastating floods like the one that occurred in 1943. Worried that the Corps of Engineers would dominate development of the river, the Department of Interior's Bureau of Reclamation sent Glenn Sloan, who was their Montana office assistant director, to produce their own plan. Pressed by President Roosevelt to resolve the conflict and reach a compromise, the interagency group met in October 1944 in Omaha. The most difficult disagreements involved which agency would be given what authority and which list was going to be authorized by Congress for construction. In simple terms, the agreement gave the Corps the authority over design and management of the mainstream dams, and the Bureau was given authority over irrigation and much of the hydropower projects in the West. As to which of the list of dams to be built, the compromise was simple. Pick Sloan authorized the construction of them all. The compromise, I've been involved with compromises like that. It's a lot easier to agree if we just agree to do what both sides want. The compromise also gave the states new, though limited, role in the decision-making. Pick Sloan, in my opinion, had a larger economic, social, and environmental impact on the Missouri River Basin than any other act by the Congress. It has literally transformed for the good the economy of the region, from one where agricultural production could be wiped out by too much or too little water to one that dependably produced food for the country and the world. It added more low-cost, clean power production for businesses and homeowners. It provided man-made lakes and fisheries that brought more tourism and jobs. It reduced the frequency of floods that interrupted commerce and lives. It made navigation possible by lowering the cost and increasing reliability. Amendments to that law have authorized the Corps to become a major force for environmental good by restoring some of those wetlands along the river's course. But the construction's not been all positive, in my view. Millions of acres of wildlife habitat have been destroyed. And this loss is a lot more important than just getting worried about a species that might be endangered. We've lost one of the world's best hunting and fishing habitats. And readers of Robert Schneider's Unruly River will hear the account of the last 2 centuries of river development and will learn, in my view, how much we have lost of the beauty and value of our wild Missouri. You have also lost a fair amount of time listening to me now recount a history. My guess is many in this room already know, but I did want to establish some historical context in order to discuss now the conflicts, most of the conflicts that have occurred since statehood. There are several distinct categories of conflicts over river water. The first and obvious one are between upstream and downstream states. It was quite remarkable that you get 10 senators from the upstream and downstream states to sign a letter. Montana wants to store water. They're concerned, they're short water. They're on the other side of the 100th meridian. They want to store water. South Dakota is the same way. They've got major investments in tourism through the lakes and reservoirs that they built. Downstream, it's different. Nebraska's sort of in between. We have irrigation needs, we have flood control needs, we have navigation needs, and the further south you go, the heavier the rainfall gets, and the less they're concerned about the concerns that Montana has. These are real conflicts, real life and death conflicts. They're not conflicts that merely exist on a textbook. People fight over them. In the past, we've gone to war over them. People have lost friends as a consequence of these stream flow conflicts. They're enormously significant, and my argument is that when they're not resolved, you may think, gee, I won, nothing happened. But my view is the strength of the basin is weakened when we're not able to resolve those conflicts, when we're forced to go to court to resolve them. The second type of conflict are between the alternative uses of stream flow in the water. That is to say, between irrigation and recreation, between navigation and flood control, between environmental uses, and probably all of the above. You also have conflicts between municipalities, between a city that's downstream and a city that's upstream. And these municipality conflicts can be real. and they can erupt when you least expect it, and they're exceptionally difficult to resolve, in my view, in a satisfactory way. There are three methods that we currently have to resolve conflicts, and three alone. The first is negotiation. But negotiation only works if both parties recognize that the status quo is unacceptable. And in politics, that's rarely the case. It's rarely the case that the elected official is going to see it that way. So oftentimes negotiation is the most difficult thing to accomplish. The second way of resolving a conflict is litigation, and that's been the most popular course of action, to go to federal court to sue the state of Wyoming, to go to federal court to try to resolve a conflict. It's why the Supreme Court has been as such an important arbiter in these disputes. And the third is to resort to federal law, to change the law itself, and hopefully in a way that helps to resolve the conflict, which I'm about to get to. From the beginning of the development of the West, what we need and what we've never had is a multi-state mechanism for the 10 Missouri River Basin states to resolve conflicts in a way that allows for the people living in the basin to change the use of the river as their vision of the river changes. Ever since Congress rejected John Wesley Powell's recommendation that the boundaries of the river basins be used as boundaries of newly admitted western states, and did I get it? No, I didn't get it. Oh, go down. Sorry. There it is. An unusual map, the John Wesley Powell. Ever since his proposal was rejected, our political leaders have been reduced to blaming the government officials in order to shift public attention away from them. The need to, and I did a fair amount of that myself, full disclosure, the need to create such a mechanism for coordination of planning is not new. Many people have tried in the past. And from my limited research, it appears to me that Nebraska Senator Hugh Butler's 1953 effort to create a Missouri River Basin Compact was the closest we came to creating a way for officials elected by the public to make Missouri River quality and quantity decisions. Senator Butler's proposed legislation would have created the Missouri Basin Commission. The commission would have been authorized to make integrated plans for the conservation, the development, and use of the basin's water resources. Member governments would be required to submit to the commission all plans for projects for flood control, irrigation, or other use or management that might substantially affect interstate use of water. Findings of the commission would be binding. Senator Butler was in a position to do something about it. He was chairman of the Senate's Committee on the Interior and Insular Affairs. But tragically, he suffered a stroke on July 1, 1954, and died later that day. His bill, nonetheless, was reported out of committee in August, but it was not considered by the full Senate until 1955. And by then, opponents had mustered enough strength to ensure its defeat. And most of the opposition, by the way, came from government agencies, not from individuals living in the basin itself. In 1965, Congress passed and the President signed the Water Resources Planning Act, which is supposed to allow the several water policies and programs of the federal agencies and state governments to be coordinated in a more comprehensive manner than had occurred in the past. Under this law, states were granted co-equal status with the federal agencies. In 1972, under the authority of this law, President Nixon created the Missouri River and Basin Commission. This entity lasted just 9 years. In 1981, without much protest, President Reagan shut it down. In my opinion, both of these failed because they had little real power or binding authority. The bark of a dog without teeth does not get our attention. The next year, the 10 states tried again. They created the Missouri Basin States Association, but the MBSA was disbanded in 1986. I was governor at the time and remember being told that the MBSA had so little power it wasn't worth attending the meetings. Creating a 10-state basin commission with real authority would not end the conflicts that we have over the river, but it would allow the conflicts to be resolved. And this is extremely important to do and next to impossible under current law. You can see why it's possible if you just look at how each of the states view the river. Of the 10 states that border the Missouri Basin, 3 don't touch the main stem at all: Colorado, Wyoming, and Minnesota. 2 provide 80% of the storage available to the main stem systems, Montana and Wyoming. And 3 contain the vast majority of Pick-Sloan storage, that is Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Creating a 10-state basin commission with real authority could not be done unless each state recognized the benefits of working together, even in those moments when the vote went against their short-term interests. Acting upon this recognition is among the most difficult things for democratically elected representatives to accomplish. Let me illustrate by taking Senator Butler's 54 legislation and modifying it, I would say just slightly, to my view, to improve it. The late Senator Butler would agree. But first, I use his language, which superimposed the authority of this basin onto existing federal and state agencies. States would not, under this law, surrender any powers they currently possess. The intent of this legislation is to move water adjudications from the federal to the state courts. Second, each of the states would be represented on the commission. Third, in some way, he did not specify it, but he indicated it should be done, the Indian nations in the basin would be entitled to voting membership as well. Fourth, I'd impose upon the Missouri Basin Commission a decision-making process that cannot be bound by a requirement of consensus. Consensus decision-making would doom the Missouri Basin Commission to a speedy death. I prefer majority or, in exceptional cases, supermajority rule. Fifth, in apportioning voting power, I'd recognize the importance of the Missouri River to each state and the tribes. I'd probably use the fraction of the state that drains into the basin as the basis for apportioning voting power. You can see I'm a little biased in that regard since Nebraska has 100% of our state draining into it, but there's significant differences. And the voting power should not be apportioned without recognizing that fact. Sixth, I would allow the governors of each state to be the voting representative or to allow them to appoint someone in their stead. I would not impose upon the governor any specific list of qualifications for appointment other than they had the full support of the governor. Seventh, I would examine the possibility that the Missouri Basin Authority would have control over the revenue generated by hydropower in the basin. In my 16 years in Senate and as governor, on a number of occasions, both Democratic presidents and Republican presidents tried to steal that revenue anyway. And my view is likely at some point the feds are going to take it. Better for us to take it and use it for basin development. Eighth, I would sunset the commission after 5 years. It should not have a perpetual existence. A reauthorizing requirement is a healthy check on the power of any government entity. I need to restate here that the purpose of this Missouri River Basin Commission is not an end to our conflicts, the conflicts that we have over the use of the water that flows down the Missouri River. Now, the Basin Commission would solve a significant problem by creating a much-needed public gathering place where conflicts must be resolved. By doing so, the people living in the basin could expect less frustration, not no frustration, but less frustration over how the river is managed. Greater prosperity as a result of the river's proper use for current needs, and a greater satisfaction that we are also allowing the river to sustain the lives of non-human species. I recognize that I may, in the process of delivering this lecture, I apologize for lecturing you, I may have identified a problem, that is the difficulty of satisfactorily resolving conflicts over the use of the Missouri River, that is of little interest to others. Recognizing that this might be the case, I'm reminded of a lunch I had not too long ago with two other fellow Lincoln natives, Ted Sorensen and Dick Cavett, just before Ted Sorensen had his fatal stroke. These two men collected insults. I think the older I get, the more I like that category of, and they were competing with one. It was like dueling banjos. See who had the best insult. And hands down, Dick Cavett had the best insult. And here's the insult. He said, I was asked to write an obituary for Eddie Fisher. And I began the obituary by saying, I never met Eddie Fisher, but I didn't like his work. But I remembered, he said, seeing him at some point in my youth. And then I remembered. They had a television show I watched when I was in Lincoln in 1953 called This Is Show Business. 3 successful performers were on the panel, and an up-and-coming performer would appear before the panel with a problem. And before the panel came Eddie Fisher, and he said, my problem is that I'm appearing at the Copacabana, and because I look so young, the showgirls won't go out with me. And on the panel was a successful playwright and director by the name of George S. Kaufman. It was a bit of a misanthrope, and you can see why in his answer. He said, Mr. Fisher, so 10 years ago on Mount Wilson, they built a telescope at an altitude of 5,238 feet. And because it's built at an altitude of 5,238 feet, it can see objects in space 100 times closer up than if it was built at sea level. And just recently, Mr. Fisher, they began building another telescope, this one on Mount Palomar, using the latest technologies. And because, Mr. Fisher, it uses the latest technologies, it can see objects in space 100 times closer than the one on Mount Wilson. And here's the punchline, because Cabot, watching this, is wondering where is George S. Kaufman going. He said, Mr. Fisher, if somehow they could take that telescope on Mount Wilson and put it inside that telescope on Mount Palomar, you still couldn't see my concern for your problem. Now, I do hope that you don't feel that way, but either way, this lecture is now mercifully at its end. And I want to thank again my alma mater for inviting me. It is wonderful to be back, and I want to thank again the Heuermanns for their generosity in making this lecture series possible. And I want to thank this audience both for your attendance and your attention. Thank you very much. Okay.
We have time for some questions from the floor, and I believe there are a couple of roving mics that are going to be, there's one up top with Mary Garbitz and one down here with Jill Brown. So if you have a question or a comment or anything that you would like to ask Senator Kerrey about, please raise your hand. One here in the back on the bottom floor.
Test your voice out, see if it's loud enough.
Test.
Thanks. Thanks very much for a very enjoyable talk and an informative one. Could you tell us which river compacts already in existence might serve as models for the one you're describing for the Missouri?
No, I can't, actually. I mean, I know the compacts have been created, and they've fallen, as I said, there was an attempt when I was governor to establish informal compacts. That's what the Basin Commission was supposed to be, but they failed because they just didn't have authority. So I suppose the most important ones are in some ways are Bonneville, maybe TVA, although TVA you actually set up. It's different than what I have in mind, because TVA you set up an administration that governs. It really governs. It's a different. There was a lot of opposition, actually. There was debate in 1944 over whether or not to establish an authority comparable to what the Tennessee Valley Authority has. It'd be interesting to know how George Norris felt about that proposal, but Hugh Butler was opposed to it, and I think he was right. I think it just becomes another agency that's difficult to penetrate. And I'm not by any stretch anti-Corps, anti-Bureau. In fact, that's the evidence that I offer that they're the only game in town to criticize. Is evidence that I would offer that we need to create some kind of authority along the lines of what Hugh Butler, now modified by me, has proposed. Yes?
I'm going to try to answer the latest question. I was the commissioner on the, I'm Bob Rook, I'm the commander of the Corps of Engineers here in Omaha, and I was also the commissioner in the Delaware River Basin Commission. I was the alternate for the CGA, just like you proposed that the governors would have someone that they appointed. And the real importance was, I think what you're getting to here, is everybody was at the table. And it's still a very difficult organization that I believe there are several of the commissions put together under President Kennedy. And but everyone was at the table. And that's what I have struggled with in leadership in the basin here. At no time until recently have we gotten everyone to the table. And when we had the most.
You've united the delegation on the basin.
But that's before they've heard from their other constituencies. Flood control's at the top of their minds right now, but those other authorized purposes each have a constituency, and each one of them are starting to be heard from again. Navigation's starting to creep back in saying, don't release our water from those dams. So at any rate, I just want to say that Delaware River Basin Commission is a pretty good example. I know there's a Susquehanna River Basin Commission and several others as well that are up and working. The one organization that I thought had a chance at coming out of this flood was perhaps MORAS, the Missouri River States and Tribes Association, but we've seen that Nebraska and Iowa have just pulled out of that. So that's one where we had everybody at the table except Missouri, and they would send a lawyer to keep tabs on it. But now Montana has pulled out, so they're not participating.
You need a better name than Morass. I just
I
that may be why we pulled out. I don't know.
Anything that would bring everyone to the table would be a good answer.
Other questions for our speaker? They're going to let you off easy, Bob.
Oh my God, Gene Glock has a question.
But if you recall, when I was on your staff,
I do recall.
the federal, hard to forget, wasn't it?
No, it's wonderful.
The federal government spent a fair amount of money sending me to these quarterly meetings of the Missouri River. I can't even name the acronym now, but you're absolutely right in the fact that they had no authority. And we spent hours from all the different states discussing how we felt about it and what the problems were, but everybody got tired of going because you couldn't do anything about it. So I think you're right. Something has to be done to give people authority.
I haven't done any economic analysis at all in preparing for this, but my instincts are that if that's all, and that would be a primary purpose. People in the basins today care about jobs. They want to create jobs for their kids. They want the kids to stay in the basin after they graduate from high school or college. And my instincts are it'd be a lot easier to create jobs in the basin with this kind of authority because it'd be a primary concern. The question would be, how do we create jobs? How can the Missouri River and the development of the Missouri River create jobs for us? And I think it would become a significant new add to the. Now, in '44, Roosevelt felt the war was going to come to an end. Although the Battle of Bulge occurred about the same time as it occurred in December of '44 when he signed it. But the instincts were correct. The war ended in '45, and he had millions of GIs coming home. So he's also trying to create jobs just in the construction. But that's, in my view, kind of short-lived. The development of this basin that has occurred as a consequence of Pick Sloan. Again, I don't have ready access to the gross domestic product coming out of these 10 states. But it has to be several $1 billion more per year as a result of the development of this effort. I mean, you wouldn't be, without not just the Corps, but the Bureau's projects, you'd have nowhere near the reliable production of food that comes as a consequence, nowhere near the reliable development of tourism as a consequence. So my guess is the economic impact has been quite impressive. It's just that we really weren't necessarily thinking about that in the aggregate. Certainly not as a basin, we weren't thinking about that. And you take those 10 states, we don't have a lot of people in that 10 states relevant. I mean, I'm tomorrow morning going to fly back to a city where I live right now. There's 8 million people there. It seems like there's 799,999 more than I'd like, but the basin and the population of the basin, I think, has a very difficult time taking advantage of the river and developing it. And I know it's controversial to say this, but that wildlife habitat along the river is a huge economic engine, and we didn't see it that way then. We didn't see it as an economic value added in 1944, but it unquestionably is. There's an awful lot of people that come to Nebraska to hunt and fish, and an awful lot more. You can sort of envision what's possible on that river. But there's trade-offs to get it done. And I'll be even more controversial and say, my guess is it's likely there's more economic value added there than there is in navigation. And this is just a proposition here. That's where the conflict is. My guess is that trade for the development of habitat against navigation would be beneficial to the economy of Nebraska. It's a guess. I don't know. I don't have facts on my side, but it's an instinct. And I know that if I sat on the banks of the Missouri River in Omaha, I don't know how long it would take before I saw a barge, but not as frequently as I saw them in the 50s. Somebody here must know. Is it one a week, one a month? It's like unicorns anymore, isn't it? So, but that's the kind of question that the public could propose and could ask in a campaign. When people are campaigning for the Senate or campaigning for the governor, they don't get asked about the Missouri River, except when it floods. And when it floods, we get asked, well, how come the Corps screwed it up? And then we write a letter to the Corps. And we hold the letter up at our town hall meetings, and the public thinks we're doing an okay job. So except when it floods, we hardly ever pay attention to it. And I think we would pay attention a lot more if we were sort of focused on its capacity both to develop the economy as well as to improve the quality of life in the basin. Yes, sir. Uh-oh.
I'll try without.
Roger, I can hear you.
Did you just give your speech on the back to the river? Did you just give your speech that you had when you were going back to the river about 20 years ago?
Oh,
Remember, you had
maybe.
a program in place. I wondered what you were dreaming then.
Yeah, I would say approximately. Yeah, I don't. You know, part of the problem when you start talking about this is people think, oh, you want to blow up the dams. You want to bring back the spring and the summer rise. You want to obliterate the economic activity up and down the Missouri. Well, I'm willing to posit that had we developed cars and trains before we came here, you know, with boats and wagons, we might have set our cities back a little bit further. But I promise you, if I'd have come here in 1830 and offloaded in Omaha, Nebraska, I wouldn't want to build my warehouse 10 miles away because you tell me there was a 100-year flood up on that highland. So you don't have to blow up those dams. I don't actually think you have to do significant changes in the way the river is managed. But yes, I think that the development of habitat along that river adds a lot of value to our lives, but I also think it adds economic value.
Yeah, Senator.
Hi.
How would your proposal be different, better, worse, whatever, in the case of a flood than what we currently have, like the 2011 flood?
Well, it might not be. I mean, I haven't done the analysis of how the Corps managed it, but my instincts are if it's the largest amount of water that flew into the basin since 1898, maybe they could have done some things differently at the margin. Always, anytime I look back, everything's clear. I mean, I see every mistake I ever made. Actually, I don't see every mistake I ever made. I see every mistake you ever made. I don't. So I don't know. I don't know if it could have been managed differently. Actually, I think in terms of flood control, the Corps does a pretty darn good job. There may have been some mistakes made. I don't know. At the very least, I'm going to have a lot more transparency about what's going on, and I got to take some ownership in it. So if I'm the governor of Nebraska and I'm a voting member of the commission, I vote to do the following things in instruction. I have to say to the public, look, I don't control Mother Nature. I don't decide how much rain is going to fall in the basin in April and May. I don't decide how much snow melt's going to run off the Rockies and when it's going to run off. I don't control any of that. And the best I can do is make a guess based on historical averaging. That's the best I can do and manage accordingly. So it's better, I think, in a situation like that, if we all take a little ownership in the decision making as opposed to merely delegating to somebody who can be sort of a convenient kicking boy when things go bad. Yes, sir.
Instead of being the governor that complains to the Corps and writes a threatening letter.
Oh, I might still do it. But yeah, it's going to be a little harder if you're basically criticizing your own decision. I repeat it. It's to manage a river the size and intensity of the Missouri. This is an intense river. I mean, this is not the Mississippi. This is a big and wild and frightening river when it rises up on us. And to say, well, I figured it all up. I've got an algorithm here, and we're gonna manage this thing like turning a faucet on and off. It's nonsense. It isn't gonna happen. And so if I have ownership as an elected person, and I'm saying to you, this is a decision I've made, and this is why I've made the decision, but understand, I may get it right and I may get it wrong. I mean, you think of the total damage that was occurred in 2011. I don't know what the GAO is going to come back with. Maybe they're going to come back with some things that are useful to the Corps and useful to the people living in the basin as we try to figure this thing out. But I don't, as I've said it now too many times, I'm not proposing something to end conflicts. I'm not proposing, certainly not proposing something that's going to solve the fallibility of human decision making. Both of those are always going to be there. Yes. Yes, Sandra.
You had mentioned the cost associated with fishing, but the farming costs, the cost to agriculture, the flood is not over by far. There is tons and tons of sand. I just flew in from a business meeting, and the people sitting behind me said, I had no idea that Nebraska had so much water. There is still water sitting there. Farm Bureau did a estimate of just, I believe it's our 2 counties along Burt and Washington County, $185 million lost so far.
Well, I mean, I haven't actually seen that kind of detail, so I don't know. I do remember the '93 flood where,
this flood stayed for 3 months full, and they gradually let it out. There is still extensive damage that now the volunteers cannot pick up sticks. We're talking about huge farm-sized propane tanks littering up and down the river. Heavy-duty bulldozers, and the investments individual families have had over the years. We still don't know until spring, I believe, what they will need to do to bring their farms back to production. Thousands of acres.
Yeah, I know that land pretty well. I can sort of imagine the damage.
The fishing and hunting and everything upstream has just,
But let me. It's wonderful having former in front of every title that I own. So other than Bob, I'm still not a former Bob. So I'm going to make a couple points here. One is I remember '93 very well, and what we learned in '93 is the dikes that we built to contain the river broke and increased the damage because the water couldn't get back into the river. So maybe some of the structures that we've created in order to minimize the damage may have actually made the damage worse. I don't know. Secondly, I remember in '93, we discovered that we had a fairly significant number of people living right on the river in Omaha. Actually, that's incorrect. They were living in the river. They weren't living on the river. They were living on the river. If you think that the watermark in August is the watermark that you use for the width of the river. They were living in the river. And we relocated them. We hadn't, and there was, well, you've taken away my property. Well, it's only because we built these structures that you are able to go down here anyway. The other one was, it produced the demonstration outside the governor's mansion. I don't know if you know this or not. I sometimes can say things that are inappropriate. And so the blue flooded, and the little blue flooded, and it flooded DeWitt. I don't know if anybody here's from DeWitt. I'm probably the second time around offending, but remember, I'm former. So they came and visited me. They want to build a dam upstream. I said, look, I worked my way through college pouring concrete slabs for grain storage facilities all around DeWitt. I know that town well. You don't have a town near the river. You built DeWitt in the river. I'm not going to build a dam upstream, which we'd have to use eminent domain to take property away from somebody else in order to build it. That doesn't seem to me to be a fair trade. Well, we ended up, after a few demonstrations, helping him out a little bit. But that part of what we have to say to ourselves is, if I choose an activity close to something that's dangerous, What's the public's obligation to protect me? I mean, we're all on the hook of all these folks that are living in Florida that can't buy insurance for their houses. Why? They have hurricanes every year. Well, you've chose to live in Florida. You knew the damn hurricanes are going to come every year. Why am I on the hook to bail you out every year that your house gets blown away? I mean, that's my attitude. It's, I mean, I know the land that you're talking about. It doesn't fit in the category that I'm describing,
it
but
does not.
that is the kind of thinking that we have to deploy, it seems to me. And you would, in a public setting, if you had a Basin Commission, and I'm a governor, as horrifying as that thought might be to all of you at the moment, if I'm the governor of Nebraska and I'm on that commission, I cast a vote, I have to decide. Those are the kinds of trade-offs that occur in the public environment all the time, instead of asking the Corps to do those trade-offs, and then, as I said, blaming them when they sometimes trade in the wrong way because they can't predict the weather any better than we can.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Bob Kerrey. Just a few housekeeping items before you run out the door. First of all, a couple of thanks. It takes a lot of effort to put these events on, and I want to just recognize a few people. Our Ed Media staff, who helps us with the web streaming and the archiving, who are here and do such a good job for us. Judy Nelson. Judy was in the back earlier. Judy is part of Ed Media as well, and she's been coordinating and chairing this event for us and has done a wonderful job. I really appreciate what Judy has done. Merd Holland in our office, in the Vice Chancellor's office, coordinates with our speakers. Really appreciate the work that Merd does. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. Now, as you know from the previous couple of lectures, I'm announcing for you the next lecture that will be on January the 17th. Please mark this down on your calendars. It will be at 7 in the evening. Here in this room. We had previously announced it would be in Kimball Hall. We since have found that we have some difficulty with the TV coordination there. We'll be holding it here in this auditorium at 7 p.m. on January the 17th. We'll be welcoming our speaker, Stuart Brand, who is the author of Whole Earth Discipline, an Eco-Pragmatist Manifesto. That's a wordful. Environmentalist Brand was founder and editor of what many of you will recognize as the Whole Earth Catalog. So please come and join us to hear what Stuart has to say. He is a person, as an environmentalist, that was very opposed to genetic engineering and nuclear power in particular, and in recent years has completely reversed his views around genetic engineering in particular. So I think you'll be very interested to hear what he has to say. So January 17th, 7 p.m. here in Hardin Hall. We hope to see many of you and tell your friends. Thank you for being here today, and Merry Christmas.